In October of 1997, a 15-year-old boy named John Hartman was beaten to death on the streets of Fairbanks, Alaska. 4 young men, 3 of them Athabascan Indians, were convicted of his murder. Yet years later, the case remains open and unsolved. Who's responsible? And how many killers were out on the streets that night? Was racism to blame for these convictions? I'm your host, Matt Ralston, and this is the story of John Hartman and the Fairbanks 4, case of murder on ice. Welcome to the first of 2 bonus episodes of Murder on Ice. I'll be joined by my good friend Tyler Broker. He's a First Amendment attorney, but he also just follows this case, and so we're going to go over some of the basics. Remember to rate and review the show on iTunes. It's a really simple step, but it's how podcasts get ranked, so it's important. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Murder on Ice. We'll be back with more updates to the story soon. But enjoy the bonus episode.
But I think, before I get into trashing, my profession, I want to defend it a little bit. And I'll just say that, judges are trained to perform legal analysis. They go to school for it. They have a good degree of background in it, professional background. It's not a cop-out to say they're not scientific analysis. They're not tuned into that type of analysis. And that law and science are 2 very different fields. That's not a cop-out to say it. It's just kind of true. But that all said, I think this case demonstrates a real problem that has to be fixed, because although science and the law are different fields, courts simply admitting the evidence, scientific evidence, that kind of the tread marks, you look when they put it, it was a big controversy. They put the boot tread over the picture and this totally subjective stuff, but when you submit it as evidence in courts, that lends an appearance of legitimacy. That resonates with people, and logically does that. And so I think, you got to be careful. Just looking at this quote, that's what stands out to me the most, is how much of this, and we'll never really know. I mean, you can say, they're innocent or whatever. You'll never really know, and that's maybe the tragedy of the whole thing. No one will have any, finality to this, because the techniques and there's so many issues with this investigation. It's just horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess it is easy to point a finger at the judge, but he's, and they do have discretion, right? But isn't he more or less obligated when the state, the head medical examiner, vouches for this stuff? And that was a guy named Frank. I don't know how to say his name. It's either Falico or Falico.
Yeah.
And he did some backtracking. We're talking about the boot exhibit now specifically, but it was really wordy. Essentially, he's saying, well, it met a certain standard, maybe not the highest standard, but essentially he's saying they asked me to do it and it was a formality. But I don't know if you've ever seen, I hope you've seen the movie Grizzly Man.
I actually haven't.
Oh, bro.
I know the whole story right now. I know it very
You
well.
gotta watch it because it's absolutely hilarious. People from Alaska, see, I watched it with my family, and we all grew up in Alaska, and our thought was it was a comedy. Because, he shouldn't have been out there with the bears. But then I talked to people from the States and told them I thought it was funny, and they looked at me like I was some kind of serial killer or something. But the guy, the medical examiner, is in that movie because he dealt with deaths, and he's insane. He is a googly-eyed, crazy person that just comes off as like you almost think it's a Christopher Guest movie or something. He seems like he's turned on sometimes by talking about mauling. It's very strange, but so I don't know if that guy was playing with a full deck, but I'll say that that's. But so a judge has to trust those people, right? That's the whole system.
Yeah, and the courts have standards and burdens, obviously to surpass to admit any type of evidence. You know what I mean? You can't have hearsay, for example. It's got to meet some kind of burden. And in fact, like there's Supreme Court, there's Daubert v. Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals. It's a Supreme Court case that lays out kind of markers, what you call markers that judges, should look for when assessing scientific evidence, right? So it's not like it's just it exists in a vacuum. There is stuff here, and the problem is, you're identifying one, and this, the cast of characters that you have in these kind of positions, and Radley Balco has the Washington Post. He's written a book on this. The Cadaver King and the Country Dentist, and it's about the power kind of that local coroners have. That a lot of them have no credentials or things like this, and it's just. But they're presented as, when you're the state board examiner, or you're the county coroner, you represent, some kind of an authority there. And so when you're admitting this evidence is bonkers. That's a real problem. And you can't say like, well, judges are different. That's not you can't allow that. Like the something has to improve, and it has to a certain degree, since that time. Stuff like the confession, the interrogation techniques, there's been movement on that. But a lot of, there's a lot, bite mark, Radley, that's another thing Radley Balco's really gotten into is bite mark analysis. And it's been thoroughly debunked. Like, completely enough, there's no no scientific basis for it at all. No one's ever proved. Like, and they just hilariously prove that, it's ardent supporters they hilariously prove they're wrong. And just, with simple tricks, they can't match bite marks or anything like that, and so it's a real problem. And there are, to answer your question, there are standards, but the people that are, doing the standards are kind of a problem, and the standards themselves are kind of the problem too. There needs to be significant reform, and that reform must, add, I think, a little more scrutiny to who comes across as an expert or what is accepted scientific, consensus.
Yeah, because there's so much quackery, like with bite marks, for example, and it's something I would have never thought about because you hear it enough times and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, a guy has teeth and he bites someone and you match it up. And then when you kind of just think about it without reading about it, because that's how I roll, just on its face, it kind of seems ridiculous, doesn't it? But you...
Well, you got to look at it. You got to think, like, what are these, this bite, this trend, and, it's a pattern analysis. And when you're looking at a pattern analysis, we human beings, it's so, we're pattern oriented, like on a biological say, like, it's so subjective. It is entirely so subjective. It's so difficult, but it's being presented as like an objective opinion, come to agree. And it raises, and we have there's enough bodies piled in innocents that have been killed, and put to the death chamber that we now know, DNA is the prime example that everyone knows, that's overturned a lot of convictions and everything like that. But we're way past time having to make the kind of reforms as far as courts assessing scientific evidence. There's got to be a lot of it's beyond my pay grade to even say like what everything is. I'm not a total expert on this, but even I can recognize, as a novice in the field and an attorney, that we got a serious problem.
Right, and I don't know how that can be fixed. I don't know if there needs to be like a federal panel, or there needs to be some kind of panel of experts that really rule on what's legit, because you can be a quack and just make up your own field of study, like chiropractic, for example. you can just decide I'm going to start pressing people's spines and call yourself a scientist, but you're actually not. And really, a lot of these guys, these expert witnesses, they find a niche that's there, and they carve it out. But there's no hard parameters on what counts as science. It's essentially, if you say it is, then
there is. Remember, the Supreme Court has laid out markers. So there are markers here, and there's things to judge. The problem is the way that they haven't been updated in a while. And the degree to which they were there, it wasn't even that good. But the markers that came out of here spawned a kind of like it spawned a bunch of, like, I would call, to be generous, dubious organizations like forensic boards and certifying organizations that like would certify you and say you're an expert, kind of a deal. Like this created, like, think about it, that Supreme Court created like that industry. It created a demand for this, that kind of stuff. But it's not, those aren't being regulated very well, and that what's coming out of it. Not only that, but they don't have very good records. We put it that way, like of predicting expertise and kind of maintaining that scientific discipline, I guess is the term to use there. And so there just has, we're past time. There's so many bodies that have stacked up and lives ruined that we're way past due.
So to me, it seems, and I don't know how to navigate this. I'm sure that you do. If you're an expert, let's just say you're an expert in something totally legitimate, like let's say you're a podiatrist and you have to testify about someone's foot got injured, and you get paid for that by the state or by the defense because you have to take off work and travel maybe, and that makes sense. But it pisses me off to no end when DuPont dumps a bunch of lead into a river and they find some hack professor who may even teach at Harvard, and he goes up on the stand and says, it's really not a big deal. And he does that in exchange for money. It's a transaction, right?
Yeah. I think, you're stating something that, me as an attorney, I would just fear, and I would hate you on a jury. Because like because what you're talking about, it presents a bias more so, I think, on the defense attorneys or a plaintiff's attorney, because they're the private person, you know what I mean? And so to get an expert, they got to pay somebody. You got to, and I think the legitimate way, right, and expertise is a thing. And you should be paid for your expertise. I don't see any problem with that, and especially don't see any problem with it in a court of law. But when you're the side of the government and you're an expert, when you have, in this case, it was the head guy, right? He was the one testifying. I think it was in the state. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain. Where or at least he worked for the state. That presents, even though he's getting paid, he's getting compensated for this. Just like a person on a defense, they come with an air of legitimacy. They bring about a greater, just by the fact that they're the state, and they come off as even more objective, you could say. Whereas what you're talking about is it's a sleazeball attorney who's getting the sleazeball professor to go, who's just going to say whatever he wants because he wants his money. That tends to fall kind of on the defense or the plaintiff's attorneys, and that in a way it's unfortunate, in a way it's understandable. But there's also ways to fix that, and the reform could, kind of at least make that kind of negative bias less impactful on an objective way on the facts. That's what courts are supposed to. That's what they're there for. They're present an objective case and kind of and have standards on the type of evidence that's used in it to ensure a degree of objectivity.
Yeah, and maybe I should have more faith in a jury to factor in how credible the person is. But, there were plenty of doctors that were willing to testify that cigarettes were not harmful in the 90s, right? Or in the 70s.
Right.
And you know, I guess...
No real witness that you put on the stand. I'll tell you, it's very rare to get, the perfect witness. Anybody you put on there in a case is going to be a human being who's subjected to human, and you're in a, I guess I kind of pain or regret in calling it, objective in a court, because you're having competing arguments. You have adversaries, and in that tension is where you're supposed to get to the kind of, objectivity, or make it, a decision based on a certain standard, and it's man. I think as a gateway to all of this, as a gateway to improvement, like, there just has to be a stronger emphasis on courts on, on deciphering expertise and what is a legitimate expertise. Kind of its credential and it's in its most cynical way and everything. And it may come down who, went to the Ivy League school and who didn't, you know what I mean? But at the same time, like, I don't know how you're going to find a better human system than that. It has its place.
Right. It just, I don't know, it makes me nervous. I mean, if you were charged with murder, I'm not saying that the Fairbanks 4 had this option, but if you had the choice of going before a judge or a jury, what would you pick?
Oh, a jury, every time. I have absolutely, I have much more faith in a jury. And I'll tell you this, I've worked a lot of years in politics, and I'm as cynical as they come, but I trust in America, like, I trust most generally, except for the South, and maybe areas of the Midwest, but I trust most American areas, even, deep red areas, to pick the right person, to pick the right candidate. Or, you can be, if you're a genuine candidate, like, I work for a boss who, he was a Republican and he had like a 60-some% Dem district, and he won it consistently because he just did everything right for his district. If you just do that, you know what I mean? I think people, for the most part, have a good bullshit detector. This gestures and everything notwithstanding, the bullshit you see on a daily basis in politics, whatever, I still think it's true. I mean, for the most part.
Yeah, and I know these juries were just working with what was presented, but it is a fact that there were 3 trials and 3 separate juries of 12 people found these guys guilty. So it seems like...
It's really, it is difficult when you're talking to a criminal and prosecutors don't lose, and maybe, that is the one area where you could say, like, hey, the juries, just because with prosecutors it's so different, again, because you're the state, and cops, I can't tell you how many attorneys have told me that, like, people just, if there's any kind of ambiguity, they're going to give it to, that ambiguity to the cop. They're going to give that deference to the cop. They're going to give it to the prosecutor, and that kind of, because that's it. I think it's a different case. Like, I mean, they used to say, like, we the people are bringing, charges against you. It's a very, it's something that people look up to, and they give a lot of deference to naturally. I think, in like civil case, if you're competing, where I trust a good jury, is if you're in a civil case and they don't got a horse in the race, or, you're not dealing with subject matter, which is kind of the issue you're facing here, which is a gruesome murder, and the tendency of we humans want to take revenge and kind of, holding people accountable for this. It's a powerful motivator.
Yeah, I just don't get why we continue to be told, and I think people abide by always trusting the police when they testify in court, because they lie all the time. I mean, I have a stop. What did I get? A stop sign ticket that I got here in California for, I don't know if I stopped or not. It doesn't matter, but I keep putting off first of all, it's ridiculous that I have to go to court, but I keep delaying it. So it was over a year ago, and the cop that gave me the ticket, who was a total jerk, by the way, and tried to intimidate me, he's going to come to court and say, well, assuming I plead innocent, he's going to say, well, yeah, I saw him go through the light. And I want to say, how many tickets do you give out per day? Let's say it's 2 or 3. Okay, this was over a year ago. It was a stop sign ticket. Do you have like a photographic memory? Are you super bright? Do you catalog things? Like, have you tested high on certain scales? Because I think you're lying if you say you remember it, you know? And now that's not going to work.
They got a write up on it, and that's all they. In a situation like that, I'm sure he wrote up on the ticket what you did, and he would just have to come in and say, here's the offense I have on the ticket. Here's what you did. Here's my signature, and that's pretty much all the judge is going to need to convict you.
Yeah, I guess. But why is it always my word against theirs when we've seen time and time again that they lie for whatever suits their purpose? I'm not saying all of them, but it's common. I trust an average person over a cop.
It is. You still have a generation that's brought, trust in police is probably at all-time lows. I don't think that's a shock. And I think it's trended in the other direction. I think it certainly is trended in the negative towards them because, this is becoming, public. I think that there's been an escalation in police rhetoric and behavior and things like that. But there's also, the video, the introduction of the video camera and the phone, is proving what a lot of people have been saying for a long time is true. And they're finally, it's finally getting out in the open. It's like, it is as bad though. Like what happened to, the Ahmaud Arbery, there's so many names. Breonna Taylor is a horrific, you want to say, but it's on the level of what an Emmett Till did for our country as far as the impact that it's having, obviously given the unrest and everything that we've seen lately, I think it's just as socially impactful because you're seeing butchery right in the open. In Ahmaud Arbery's case, that was a lynching. That was just a straight up lynching. It was a lynching caught on video. Think about that. It's incredible, It's incredible.
Yeah, and there's problems with the police militarizing themselves. In Breonna Taylor's case, what I never hear mentioned is why were they breaking down her door over a nonviolent drug crime? What good could come from that? They were just having fun. They're getting their rocks off.
Yeah, it's true.
Breaking
down feels good.
Yeah, it's what
if you're constantly told, when you're constantly told you're a hero and you're a warrior and you're fighting, you should put a cape on. Human beings start to believe that shit. And when you're also constantly told that every human being is a threat, every citizen is a threat to you first, and your safety is above anyone else's, it's above everyone's except for your fellow officers. It just instills a combative mindset, and it does a lot of damage, which we see a lot of times. It's not. And with Breonna Taylor, what that case showed is how difficult it is to hold members of law enforcement accountable. I think reasonable people, Matt, can disagree to the extent to which police brutality exists, and the degree to which race plays a factor into it. I think reasonable people can disagree over how prevalent it is. I don't think reasonable people can disagree that where it does occur, the people responsible, are almost never held accountable. In Breonna Taylor's case, really, here you have these guys, these cops, you could blame the judge and the cops here because the warrant was unconstitutional. And I'll get into it. I wrote a column on this for Above the Law, but there's a couple of Supreme Court cases on no-knock warrants, right? And basically what the Supreme Court laid out was that you can't, they're just very specific on this, you can't make a generalized, in order to justify a no-knock warrant, you can't make a generalized concern about a class of crime. You can't say, like, hey, all drug dealers are like this, and so we got to break. You have to narrowly tailor it to the person that you're enforcing the no-knock on as to what threat they specifically pose to you, right? Now, this is the standard. In Breonna Taylor's case, they just use bullet point language saying, like, all drug dealers destroy evidence and, and keep weapons and stuff. And so it's on its face, the warrant was unconstitutional. Now, whatever you want to say, like, okay, scumbag cop for bringing it there, but we have judges in that position to kind of be a check on that kind of shit. You know what I mean? To say, and the judge signed off. That's an important point here. The judge signed off on this. And so, but you can't hold anyone accountable for that. Then it turns out, the whole basis for the warrant was that, she had a relationship with a prior drug dealer, and who was already in jail by the time they broke down her door. I don't know if you know that, but he was already in police custody, and they're looking for him, and they're looking for drugs, right? But the whole basis why they were looking for him there was because she had gotten a package for him at her place, because she used to date him, and I think it was Balco. I'm like 99% sure of this. His source told him that, like, that it was like closed and stuff like that. But another Jacob Sullivan reason figured out, brought to light later that they knew that it wasn't drugs in there. They knew it was closed, that the package that had been delivered, the postmaster, the inspector general, or whatever, postal inspector had told them there was no drugs in that package. So they really had no reason, no suspicion on it at all. They just, it's as bad as what you're saying. And, it's an extreme case, I would say, even. But that is, all too common. It is too common, but it is on the extreme of that. But you can't hold anyone accountable. Not one person is going to be held accountable for that, other than someone getting fired. But, like, actually criminally liable, or or civilly even. Like, the city's going to, I think they already did a massive payout. But you can't even sue this person to redress their liability to you, even though there's a plain language statute 1983 that is supposed to do that. That's supposed to say that any public officer that strips you of your constitutional right, and I'm quoting here, shall be liable to the party injured. So that is a plain language direct, like, okay, we, Congress, are conferring on you, every citizen, a cause of action against a public official who uses their office to strip you of your rights. And the Supreme Court, the conservatives in power over the last 50 years, have transformed that from, it's supposed to confer liability to what's called qualified immunity, which just insulates. It's an immunity. It just manufactured immunities and defenses onto a plain language statute that just says you shall be liable to the party injured. Think about it. That's incredible. And then these people, Amy Barrett, in that hearing, I have to sit them and say this ideology that they're the ones who follow the Constitution. They're the ones who follow the law as written. It's a national scandal. It's a crying scandal.
Yeah. I mean, well, like that judge, for example, like if we dug a little bit, maybe he approves 100% of these requests. Maybe he doesn't even read them. I don't know, but maybe.
Yeah, Malcolm did an investigation in Arkansas in the Little Rock Police Department. It's called, the Little Rock Police Department, like unconstitutional war on drugs. I don't know. It's really good. But it was like, I think he examined like 105 warrants, and like 99 of them were like facially invalid, just unconstitutional. So yeah, you have judges just rubber stamping these warrants, and there's been a lot of, some pushback. Orrin Kerr was a big one on this. He's a professor at Berkeley Law now. He was at USC, but he said, there's been some movement in the Supreme Court as far as like it's Jardines and Jones and a couple other cases that people point to and say, hey, look, the Fourth Amendment's making a comeback. These are evidence, but the problem is those cases, all these cases recently are about warrantless searches, to where it's about whether a cop can search you without a warrant. They do nothing to address the ridiculously lax standard in which warrants are regularly signed off on. Now, to a degree, that's supposed to be the judge is supposed to be doing. There's just not, though. And so I don't know if further attention needs to be brought to it, but it's unconstitutional. It's pretty horrible.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely getting rid of the immunity for police officers, and that what's the law that we can't, they have certain rights that anyone else charged with a
qualified immunity.
Yeah.
I was just like, it's a ninth statute, section of law is 1983. This was the case, actually. It was part of it. The other part was a First Amendment claim, but I was a part of the Supreme Court. Nieves v. Bartlett, for God's sakes. There was a time I never thought that was possible that I could ever forget that because I was so consumed with that case. Even though I played a minor part on it, it was my uncle's case, and he brought me in because it was a First Amendment claim. And hey, I'm published. I've got 3 law review articles on the First Amendment. It's not a ridiculous thing for me to be a part of it. And,
where was this case?
It went to the United States Supreme Court. It was Nieves v. Bartlett.
Oh.
It was a 1983. It was a qualified immunity. It related to qualified immunity case because it was against a police officer. It was what's called a contempt of cop case. And what that is what we alleged, or what our client would allege, was that at Arctic Man, he's out with some friends, and what his story is that a cop walks up and wants to ask him a question, and he's like, well, I don't have to talk to you, blah blah blah, and starts giving him and he starts being probably rude to the cop, which you have a First Amendment right to do. And you have every right to tell a cop if he wants up and wants to ask you a question, go fuck off. Is it advisable? Would I advise a client to do it? No, absolutely not. But at the same time, that is a protected right. You can say, if you're not doing anything, and he's coming up and asking you a question, you say, hey, fuck off, man, I don't want to talk to you. And okay. So, he does this, and, the cop clearly, in his, view, gets irritated by this. Well, 5 or so minutes passes, and he looks over, our client looks over, and he sees the cops he was just talking to, turns out partner, talking to the kid, is the 16-year-old kid of the friend that our client was with. So it's not his kid, it's his friend's kid, right? And he sees the cop talking to him. Now he walks over, and he says, hey, you can't, he tells the cop, you can't talk to him without his parent, which is not true. That is absolutely not true. A cop can walk up and ask a kid a question, and the kid can answer it. They don't have to have an attorney and their parents there. The cop can ask you anything. Anyone can ask you anything, and you have the right to tell them to fuck right off. So him and this cop are having this back and forth when he says all of a sudden the cop just shoves him. And they ended up, and then he gets grabbed by the other cop that he was talking to before. One comes up behind him and grabs him, and they throw him down and, haul his ass into jail. And now, as in so many of these cases, now when he first brought it, I better not go into it, but, the cops, they write in their reports, that they said, I think at one point it was, they said that our client had stepped in between the kid and the police officer, right? And this is why the cop, he was getting in his face, and he even put in the report with something like he walked over to me aggressively, or some ridiculous thing like that. Like he walked over me, It's what the shit, is that? What do you mean by that? It's so subjective. But anyways, he says he stepped in between him and the kid, and so he shoved him, and, bumped in his chest and getting in his face, and so he shoved him. Well, turns out there was a camera. There was everything in Alaska, apparently. Every fucking cop, there's a news crew on him and, doing Alaska Troopers. But he ends up finding the video of it on YouTube. And what it shows is he doesn't step in between the kid and the police officer. He's just sitting there talking to the cop. And what we alleged was you can see the cop looks, and what we think happened is he sees the partner behind him, and we think the partner signal get this guy, because all of a sudden the cop, he just shoves him. The guy, our client, is just sitting there talking to him, and he steps forward, Matt, steps into his and shoves him. And then he shoves him right into the other cop, and they grab and sweep the leg and take him down.
So the cop, at some point, the cop filed a false report and probably perjured himself, and he has, he will suffer no consequences for that, and he probably does it all the time.
Yeah, but yes, it is, and I agree with you. I thought that was, I always thought that was the most egregious thing, is that he said that our client stepped in between him and the kid, and that just did not happen.
See, I just think we've...
The First Amendment claim we had was that, we called it, it's called a contempt of cop. We thought the cop, because he told the cop to go fuck off, or whatever, he told me, I don't have to talk to you, that they were like, well, we don't like this guy, you know what I mean, and so we're going to take him down. And what the standard was, what it ended up, I didn't get into it, but what the Supreme Court said was, because there was probable cause for a misdemeanor, and the probable cause is for a statute of disorderly conduct that is so broad that it can't be constitutionally valid. Like, it's so broad, like you do something, and they can take you down. But because there's probable cause, for this misdemeanor disorderly conduct, that automatically the claim is trounced. You can't do a retaliatory arrest claim if there's probable cause for anything. But when I was brought in, what I really stressed was, well, that's not good, because, there's so many laws on the books, you know what I mean? Like, you can't go like 3/4 of the mile without committing a traffic infraction. And think of it like this scenario. Think of, I'm walking across the street in a MAGA hat, and a cop, I commit jaywalking, and a cop, he's got a camera on it. Now, let's say there's been, there has been on this street, 2 people in the last year that have been caught for jaywalking there, right? Let's just say that, on that street. It's a busy street in L.A. where you are, and at least 2 people have been cited for jaywalking there. But it's on camera that this cop stops me, and I'm wearing a MAGA hat, and he goes, you know what? I never issued a citation for jaywalking, but I don't like Trump. Fuck you. I'm going to write you up. Clearly, that's retaliatory arrest for your free speech. You can't be arrested. The First Amendment prevents you from being arrested because you support Donald Trump. Should some of these whack jobs be arrested? I don't want to get into that. There's too many jokes I can make about MAGA and all that stuff. But we live in a country where you can't be arrested for wearing a MAGA hat, right? But that's clearly what this cop did. He wouldn't have stopped. You know it. He wouldn't have stopped you for that. And there's video evidence of it. Well, the Supreme Court says it doesn't matter. All you have to show is that some other people, are arrested for this crime, and it doesn't matter how much evidence you got that this was retaliatory arrest. It's immediately tossed because there's probable cause for a misdemeanor because you jaywalked. That's all he has to prove.
Yeah, I think we've slid way to the extreme side of just blind deference to police, because, like you said, with your client being well within his rights to say, he didn't have to say fuck off. If he just said, I don't want to talk to you, I don't need to talk to you, I'm not committing a crime, that he would be hounded and at the very least totally fucked with. And I don't even care where you are. That would happen anywhere. I don't think the cops even know the laws. And if they do, they don't care about them. My other thought on this...
Important to note, he claimed that when it was getting put into the car, the cop that he initially talked to said, I bet you wish you talked to me now, don't you? And that was another part of our... We were just trying to say, hey, let us take this to court. Let a jury decide. That was... When he got up at oral argument, he said, he was like, we're just, it's... The thing about these cases, and what any good attorney, or if they don't say this to you, then I don't think they are a good attorney, but when you're trying to prove somebody else's intent, that's always a difficult case. The court, when they made this ruling, because it was funny, because Gorsuch partly dissented with us, and his whole thing was an originalist textualist argument. He was like, there's nothing in the statute that puts a precondition on that it has to be, there has to be, or if there's probable cause, the claim is just, you can't have one. There's nothing in the law that says that. You're just fucking making it up. You know what I mean? And you can look at it as hard as you want. But Wait, where was I going with this? What was I talking about?
I mean, these are all these macho cop guys. You know, these are all the same type of people that have the giant American flag decal on their windshields and you know, like to talk about how American they are. And I don't even think they understand what America is supposed to be anymore.
Yeah, I do. Cops. I sympathize, honestly, as much as like I bash them, and I've devoted a lot. I've written tens of thousands of words criticizing law enforcement. So yeah, I'm not a slouch to it, but I don't think you can be a good attorney unless you view the other side's perspective on things, right? And I think, for one, cops are in a bad position. They've gotten too much put on. They have to solve the mental health crisis, and they've got to solve, drug addiction, which is a public health crisis. And so they're just not. No cop is suited. The law enforcement system itself, the criminal justice, is not suited to tackle those kind of problems.
But if we took the revenue aspect out of their job, which I think is 80% of their job, if they weren't constantly harassing people and pulling them over so they could write them tickets for expired registrations, et cetera, they wouldn't run into a lot of these issues either. If they were just focused on police work, I don't think they would have as many of these interactions with crazy people and with domestic situations,
How do you do that, I guess, is the question. The Democrats, a lot of them do defund the police. I get what they're saying, and it's what you're saying. Like, hey, let's stop using that. But the mechanism that you want to do to defund them, that's not really. I don't think to do it like the way. If you want to stop cops from having anything to do with like public health crises, it's like legalize all drugs.
Right.
But that seems like a drastic step. Now I've written columns, and I'll defend it, and I'll say it publicly. They don't listen to me. I think it's one of the worst domestic policies in the United States, like since Jim Crow. I think post Jim Crow, it's the worst. The drug war, as far as the damage that it's done and what it costs, the amount of money, the trillions that we've dumped on this, that's just utter waste. And all we have to show for it is just millions of lives ruined. Not the hundreds of thousands that are currently in jail and everything else. But I think it was 2018, and they dropped since, but we're still the entire country, like there's like 600,000 marijuana arrests, like cannabis arrests. What the fuck is that? Like that's a crime. It's just a crying scandal. And if you don't want police resources to vote to that, stop criminalizing shit. The drugs, we have way more drugs, but if they make heroin legal, you're probably not going to become a heroin addict either, because you're educated and understand and know. Like, I mean, of course, being educated and know isn't a sure preventer against heroin addiction, but it makes you at least likely, like, hey, I know what this will do to me. I know the risks involved, so it's probably not worth it. And I don't want to be, it really. Johan Hari, I think you say his name. He wrote. It's called Chasing the Scream. It's one of the best drug war books I've ever read, and then he brings a lot of like the science into it in just a matter of addiction. And he points to a study. It's called Rat Park. Have you heard of this? It's by Bruce Alexander, I think it was, of the University of Vancouver. I could be wrong about that, but basically, it's an easy Google search away. Just Google Rat Park. And what he did was, you're old enough to remember. You can remember the Drug Partnership for a Drug-Free America, the commercial in the 80s where they put a rat in a cage and they put two water bottles, and one is either laced with cocaine or heroin, and the other is just a normal water bottle. And they put a rat, and they had 100% fatality rate, overdose rate. The rat, you put this rat in the cage, and you gave it the two water bottles, and every single one of them overdosed and died, whether it was cocaine or heroin, right? Well, Bruce Alexander looked at this, and he was like, well, Jesus Christ, you're just putting a rat in a cage with nothing to do and saying, here's some drugs, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, they're going to take the drugs. So he created an experiment called Rat Park. He put a rat in a cage and gave it all the food it could ever want to eat. He gave it a bunch of multicolored balls and exercise equipment and, you know, and anything to occupy it. He gave it a bunch of other rats so he could fuck as much as it wanted to, you know, like just a rat paradise, right? And what happened? The mortality rate went from 100% to zero. Not one rat showed any inkling towards addiction of, you know, and he put the water bottles in there. I don't know if I made that clear. That one laced with heroin, the other with water. Not one rat developed an addiction. And what this says, what it indicates, and this was Johann's conclusion, and it's true, that both the right and the left, to some degree, get this wrong. It's not even about hypocrisy. It's just neither of which is following the evidence here. You know, the right will tell you that, like, drug addiction, for example, is like hedonism. You're a sinner, you know, you're indulging too much, you know, and that kind of thing. And the left, it's kind of like you don't have a choice. It's a disease. It takes you over. You're kind of you have no will in the matter kind of a thing. And what I think Bruce Alexander shows is that it's neither of those things. It's your cage. It's your human connection. You could go to work every day, so could I, drinking, you know, we could have what looks like a water bottle that'd be vodka and just get fucking hammered, but we don't because we have ambitions and other things. You're a fucking vegetarian. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We make choices.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think another endemic problem that's kind of relevant to this case too is, so we have district attorneys everywhere and state prosecutors, and they're elected, and sometimes they get it wrong, and that's understandable because they're human. Maybe they didn't have all of the information, but I think we need to have a serious conversation nationally about telling these people that it's okay to be wrong and not rewarding them, first of all, for putting as many people in jail as they possibly can. But especially they should be able to have some mulligans. You know, it's not an indictment on your character. It's almost a sign of growing up, being an adult or a virtuous person, to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong about that and I shouldn't have done that. And I screwed up. I didn't do my job correctly. Maybe I put some innocent people in jail.
Yeah.
And they will never, across the board, whatever state, Deep South, Fairbanks, Alaska, they will never say that. They'll take it to the death, claiming that they're right.
Yeah.
And I think we should reward and have a system where, you know, you can still get promoted. Just to admit you were wrong when everyone's wrong from time to time, that shouldn't destroy your career, and your career shouldn't depend on putting innocent people in jail either.
Yeah, you're up against. It's not almost malicious in my experience, and this I think just comes from my experience in politics. You're going up against criminalization, prohibition is not illogical, man. It really is. When humans are confronted with a substance or a gun, you know, an inanimate object that, you know, it's not animate, but a gun, bullet isn't, but you know what I mean? Like, that harm, that can cause harm. It's logical to think, okay, well, the right answer here is to ban that substance or to ban that gun, right? I mean, that makes sense. I guess if you want to have that national conversation, and you want to have that system reorientation, you're going to have to convince you're going to have to get over that fallacy for a lot of people. And in politics, I saw a lot of, from Democratic strongholds, groups come in and don't want to hear about legalization. Like that are just, a lot of, it was a lot of actually like Black women organizations that would come in, and I would be shocked that some of them just would, when I would talk about, because in the state, the legalization of cannabis is coming up in New York, and they didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to, and I remember just being floored, and I guess I shouldn't have been, but because it makes sense. Like from their perspective, they're seeing that they want the dealer off the street. This violence is real, and just like you can't, me being against gun control, I can't deny that guns kill a lot of people, and that like mass shootings are immense, like terrifying and destructive, and just like, you know, and I would even be fine as a policy, even, but they're becoming more rare, but even devoting way more resources to them because of how damaging it is to the psyche of everyone involved, and like what it does to a community. You know, it's a horrible thing, but you got to take kind of perspective, and this goes back to also, you got to look at the other side of things and what you're really up against when you're talking about system changing or reorientation.
For this conversation to make sense, you'll have to Google the clip Grizzly Man, then the number 12, Death Audio. Trust me, it's worth it. I guess to set this up, Dr. Frank Falco was the head coroner in Alaska, so he dealt with all these important, any important death, I believe, probably any death really, and he approved of this boot exhibit, and he did a real kind of tongue twister in terms of why and how he could have rationalized that. And I don't see how. I think he was probably covering his own ass, is what I would assume. Anyway, what did you see when you watched him on this clip?
I guess I didn't understand the necessity of it. It was weird behavior, or just like, I mean, who am I to judge, I guess, on that? But it also is just, I didn't I guess I found it weird because I didn't understand why it was happening. We all pretty much know what happens when a bear attacks. There's no, I don't need a coroner to tell me, this person was attacked by a bear. Well, how did they die? I think we all get, how that happens. I gotta say, Matt, it's not even, if you want to, it's strange behavior, certainly, but it's certainly also not the worst kind of stuff you see when it comes to coroners. This guy has at least...
You're saying it gets weirder than this if you study coroners?
Well, it gets a lot worse, let me tell you that. This guy has some, as I understand it, some kind of medical background, correct?
I believe he is a doctor.
Yeah, he's a medical... So that and enough right there. I don't know if that's rare, but what if I told you that you could be a coroner and you were not a medical doctor, and didn't really have the credentials? And
yeah, there are guys that are just straight up serial killers that take coroning up as a hobby. And who was the guy who just had a bunch of jars of people, and they were like, wait, who are you again? And he's like, well, yeah, I got this job. And you're like, what? Wait, excuse me, sir?
Well, some of the worst cases, or the worst case that I know of, and it's just because Radley Balco wrote a book on it, and it's called The Cadaver King and the County Dentist. And it just made the news recently. I don't know if you saw, but Edward Lee Howard in Mississippi was just freed after 29 years. I think he was on death row, and he was tried, multiple times, but basically the whole case came down to bite mark evidence, which is so thoroughly debunked nowadays. It's just bad. And here you had, these were two coroners. I guess one was a doctor, Michael West, but the other was the state medical examiner, Stephen Hain, and they backed up this bite mark evidence, which is kind of, if you think about it, in this case, it's subjective pattern, detection, but which is kind of suspect, right? When you have the shoe print analysis, that I would argue is just as suspect
Well,
as this bite mark, because you're doing essentially the same thing. You're like, oh, I see a pattern that.
You're making a great point, but this doesn't. I'm talking about this guy's personality. I mean,
yeah,
I agree with what you're saying, but is okay. So I understand that people get nervous around cameras. He's from Alaska. You're a sophisticated guy, but people get nervous just being interviewed and shit. You know, it's understandable.
Yeah. Right.
I'm saying, does this guy come off as like he's on medication or needs some, or do you have no comment?
I think it is very, very strange. Like, I did not understand from the moment I watched it till the last second. I was like, what the hell? What is the point of, what is he? Okay, he's talking about the case of, somebody was eaten, but he's not really.
No, but I'm talking about like a very. Look, if you had said his words, it wouldn't be weird. It's what he's acting like is what's strange to me.
Like taking almost glee in it, kind of
like community theater. How would I describe it? I don't. Performative that's a great word. Look, how many people inquire into the dealings of the chief medical examiner in the state of Alaska that have a big film crew with him? None, ever. So he might just be a nerd, but can I say it's odd? Is that fair?
Yes, I found it odd myself, just because, I mean, when you're talking about, I've seen it was like a park ranger or something talk about this specific, instance. And, and he also talked about the tape, which, there was.
He didn't come off as like, what was the horror movie with the dentist that murdered people? Dr. Right. Giggles. Did he come off like that? No, he came off as a normal human being.
Like somber about it. Like this video is like, or this audio, which I think it was like very, you listen to it and it makes you feel like horrible. You're listening to someone literally be eaten alive by a, ferocious animal. And so it's not something that you'd be smiling. It's not something that, that I would, and it was just, it's not the performative aspect of it. This is, and like kind of, his overall approach to it, I found extraordinarily odd. I didn't get it. And I didn't understand, like, what is he, like, I was sitting there watching and going, is he happy this happened? Is he like,
That's what I'm saying.
People made jokes.
Has he humped a dead body? That is the thought that unfortunately, unfortunately went through my head. Sorry, I went there. Look, I mean, here's the thing. So in Fairbanks, I had a orthodontist, and his name was Dr. Mintz, and he unfortunately committed suicide. It's a terrible story. They then brought in someone from the lower 48 to replace him, whose name was Dr. Mintz, and all they did on the sign was flip the W into an M.
That's kind of funny, but yeah.
It is funny, but it's dark.
It is dark, yeah.
But like, so this dude is from, I don't know. He's not from Alaska. I don't know. There's not much more to say about it. I just think there's something wrong there, and that's my stance.
I think it's, when it's completely unnecessary and when you're not even offering much, I think that also, like, it's not just the, how he said it, but to me, it's the content. It's like you're trying to inject yourself into this kind of horrible tragedy. And what are you offering? Like I said, like, I don't think anyone needs to have explained. All you really need to say about it is, hey, this guy or then this woman were eaten by a bear. And you can generally put two and two together on what happens when you get eaten by a bear. I think even a novice, non-Alaskan, doesn't matter. Like, it's not that hard to figure out.
It's a good point. You don't have to be from Alaska to know what it's like to be eaten by a bear. I only have like 5 friends that have been eaten by bears personally.
Yeah.
So.
I actually do know somebody who lost their father eaten by a bear. It was pretty gruesome, But like,
Are you serious?
Look at how. Yeah, I swear. Yeah, buddy, I used to work with when I was working up here. It was my last year working when I was up in the, doing road construction. It was a pretty bad deal. Like he was eaten by a black bear, and his wife watched it happen, and it was out in a kind of remote area, and so she called the cops, and the troopers flew in on a chopper. But I don't think it ended until the cops got there, and it went on for quite a while. But it's a gruesome thing, and I'm not making a video about it and gleefully dancing in front of the camera. I guess bad taste is another thing I would say about
So if this guy approves this exhibit that Aaron Ring and prosecutor Jeff O'Brien manufactured, I guess we'll just have to leave it at this. Do you think that this performance should color his judgment? I guess that's what I got.
There's a rule of evidence in Alaska. I think I'd have to double check it. It might be like 406 or something, where you can impede anybody who testifies. You can impede their character. You can attack their character, and their credibility is really the better word. Character evidence isn't necessary. There's limits on, what you have to do for a specific purpose, but you can certainly attack someone's credibility, especially if they're an expert. If they're an expert, you can say like, hey, you don't really. Basically, you could attack them on their credentials even. It could be like that simple. Be like, are you even qualified to talk about this? But also, if somebody's displaying, you could do this with any witness. If somebody did something and it's, and they get up there and they're holding their credibility out there, which this guy did, is to say like, hey, you can attack them on that. As far as using this video, I guess you could say like, I don't know about his, moral character. I don't know if it would say anything about his credibility as a, someone getting up in there and testifying about, the pattern evidence. So if I was the attorney, I don't know, the defense attorney, I don't know if I would use that necessarily.
No, but what if you were the defense and you said, look, this guy approved the boot exhibit and you played that clip? If you were a juror, would you be like, oh, well, he might
be a little weird. I guess it would look at it and be like, but there are weird people all the time that can be good at their job, I guess.
Yeah, but he's a fucking coroner, though. I mean, if you're a weird dude that works at Sizzler, I don't really care about that. He's a coroner.
I would be worried about a juror would think, well, you got to be a little weird to be a coroner, right? You're going to be talking about dead bodies all the time. So, maybe like this guy just, and that might be very well the case. He's around it so much that he kind of just doesn't really think about, hey, you're talking about 2 people that died here and maybe, a little more decorum and not be so gleeful in discussing it and being so weird about it.
I mean, you make very good points.
Yeah.
So is it?
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, my focus would be on attacking, the premise, like his credibility in the pattern evidence. I would be like, look at how they did this.
Well, yeah, I think that's a problem, but I'm just saying, like, if I was a trial lawyer, I would just show that clip and be like, well, judge for yourself. But we have to go. Yeah. But do you find it to be a problem more so than? I guess you're saying not really, right?
It is a problem and it's weird. I don't know in that specific case I would have used it. And maybe these are things you don't want to. I guess I worry about it whether it's so blatant enough. It's so weird that because you don't want a jury to be. You want to draw the inference pretty easily, right? You don't want you don't want somebody going through hoops to go through what you're trying to say. I mean, I think, the KISS applies everything. Keep it simple, stupid.
But there's also the elephant in the room in that he is creeping me the fuck out.
Yeah.
I mean,
I get that. And hey, but as far as, to say someone's creepy, think about it in this way. Does that really say anything about their credibility? In this context?
No, because if he was like a true psychopath or sociopath, he would come off as much more normal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would just, would being a psychopath say like he just didn't really care about anyone else? Does that, I mean, I don't know, you could be a functional psychopath, right? Like what's his name?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I'm starting to think, the Holmes,
Bill Holmes, William Holmes.
No. What do you call it? The famous Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, that show, he's a functioning psychopath or sociopath, where he just doesn't care about anybody else, and he just kind of, and it has no real decorum and no real social. Like, we all know somebody like that, right? We all know somebody who functions that way, and yet they can still, we all know they're either a member of our family or we know somebody in their job, and yet they're functional in their job. And so it is weird. I guess I would struggle. Let me put it this way. I would really struggle with whether I would want to show it. First of all, I would expect an objection from the other side of what the hell does this have to do with anything? And that's the other thing. The prosecutor, even if you're right, would especially then not want this to come in, because he doesn't want this is a completely unfamiliar case, has nothing to do with this case. There's no, what are you trying to do? He's just trying to blame the jury character, assassinate his character. And my, of course, rebuttal would be, hey, I'm assassinating his credibility. Look at this weird guy. I just don't know if a judge would I would expect a fight, and I don't know if the fight would be worth it. I mean, even some things can be good, and they're just, in a trial, you're just like, well, there's just no real, it doesn't give me that much. It'd be, worth a huge fight. I don't know if it's even worth it. And that's kind of where I would fall into on it. It's now, that said, I am in full agreement with you how strange and weird it makes him look. I don't want to minimize that at all. It makes him look weird as hell. It's just, I don't know how much that gives you, because as far as attacking his credibility as an expert witness on that particular issue, he's like, okay, he's weird as hell, but is he right about the, I would expect that's what any juror would think. Like, okay, yeah, this guy's a bit weird, but is he right about this?
Well,
is he right about the pattern evidence?
You're a professional person. You're thinking about it much more clearly and seriously than I am. I was just pointing and laughing at a weird man. And yeah. F you to Lionsgate, who tried to charge me $35,000 to feature that clip. But if you Google Grizzly Man 12, you will see Dr. Frank Fallico. And I appreciate, I don't even know if this was your legal advice, but, just your opinion.
Yeah, no worries, man. Anytime. It was weird. It's very weird. Don't get me wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler Broker, for your perspectives. He has a website where he writes about legal matters in a very fascinating way. It's called AboveTheLaw.com, and you can find it on Twitter, Above the Law. He's a good guy. He's like 6'8". We were on the same basketball team. But he's taken, unfortunately, ladies. Please rate and review on iTunes. Tell a friend. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Murder on Ice. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, the Matt Ralston. And we'll see you next time. Oh yeah, I forgot my trademark sign out. I'm Matt Ralston, and I'll be around.